We are bombing Venezuela right now. It is 2:35 a.m. and Pete Kedsbrook, cosplay G.I. Joe, is literally bombing Venezuela. You guys didn't stop them when they were bombing boats in the ocean. You didn't stop them when they took a tanker.
So last night, in the middle of the night, the Trump administration authorized a military operation to deploy U.S. service personnel to Venezuela, to the capital, drop bombs on strategic targets, including the memorial and grave of Hugo Chavez, and remove Nicolas Maduro, who was captured in about 15 minutes, according to my official estimate, which is not an official estimate, of the particular operation. Now, I started seeing little bits and reports, whatnot, before I went to bed about this operation starting off, and I did not think at that moment in time that it was going to be over and done with by the time I woke up, but that is exactly where we are at this moment in time. And I want all of you guys to understand that the most important takeaway of this particular military intervention is the fact that I was 100% right. I did a video on this not too long ago on this channel where I explained that the entire point of having this, oh, Maduro is trafficking drugs to the United States of America narrative out there was to justify a Monroe Doctrine style action in order to remove a dictator who is working closely and getting close with the Chinese government within our hemisphere. A lot of you like to talk crap about my foreign policy takes, but guess what? I was correct, dead on accurate, 100% accurate. It's pretty damn impressive, so you guys should give me credit where credit is due, and this is what we're going to talk about today. The operation, its success, and whether or not this is actually good for the United States of America. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
So let's be clear about a couple of things right off the top with this particular operation. First and foremost, there was no congressional authorization for this particular action. That happens to be a fact, and had the bombing actually led to a long-term war campaign, this would have been an absolute disaster for the Trump administration, as again, Congress has the right to declare war, and even when they abdicate that right in the past, typically what they end up doing is adding in like an authorization of use of military force, which was not granted for this particular location. Secondly, and this is absolutely crucial because I've been telling you about this for quite a long time on this channel, the justification of narco-terrorism is not real. It is not truthful, and it's not good for the government to lie to us. Make no mistake about that. However, I do actually think that the actual justification for getting rid of Nicolas Maduro is actually a good justification, and it is fully within the interests of the United States of America. Because as many of you guys already know, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should go to war for that oil or anything of the sort, but the fact is, Venezuela, as their regime has failed due to socialism, not due to US sanctions, has been coming very close with China, and essentially the Maduro regime has been propped up by Chinese loans, which again gives a foreign power way too much influence in our hemisphere over a nation that is an OPEC member that again has the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. Obviously, this is a threat to the United States of America's national security. It is a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, which is one of the oldest American foreign policies.
Furthermore, under the now deposed dictator Maduro, Venezuela was increasingly hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives. And they used those weapons last night. potentially in league with the cartels operating along our border. All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Monroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen.
And yeah, it is good to subvert our enemies, subvert our rivals like China, to maintain our status as a superpower in this great nation. If you don't believe that, then I don't know what to tell you. You're just wrong, incorrect, not even close, totally off base. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it is a good idea to intervene and overthrow Latin American dictatorships. Obviously, that has backfired with us in the past. It's done so in the Middle East. But I think what a lot of people are not factoring into this particular scenario is the fact that the circumstances are completely different from the Middle East, and they're completely different from previous interventions in Latin America in the past in a couple of key ways. So we'll knock out the Latin American ones so that we can get on board the same page before we talk about the Middle Eastern ones. So first and foremost, in the previous Latin American interventions, typically those were done against popular government figures that were not aligned with U.S. interests, and what ended up happening is you started up a civil war because, again, the faction that basically enabled them to get into power was actually a strong faction, and that led to negative consequences for the U.S. after that particular intervention. Maduro is not a popular figure. He lost his last election something like 70-30, and in addition to that, that woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who was the leader of the opposition in Venezuela, was actually disqualified from being able to run against him because she likely would have won against him by Maduro's regime. So this is a guy who 70% of the Venezuelan population ended up rejecting, and likely more of them would have rejected him if the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize was actually allowed to run and not denied that right by Nicolas Maduro. So he was already a waning in popularity dictator. That is not the same thing as an up-and-coming or like a Hugo Chavez when he first took office kind of person. This is completely different. So yeah, that key distinction, which I don't often see getting made on the internet.com, is one that is absolutely crucial. Now, of course, let's talk about the Middle Eastern one, because everybody wants to bring up Iraq, Libya, and of course, Afghanistan. And I want to start with Afghanistan first, because again, it's very important to understand the key differences between these nations and the nation of Venezuela, so we can actually judge this not based on the popular internet memes, but, you know, based on facts and reality. So first and foremost, Afghanistan was a very tribal society. Obviously, they're overwhelmingly Islamic, so the idea that you are going to control and install a central government in Afghanistan when that's never happened before was obviously a blunder, and the nation building for 20 plus years in Afghanistan reflects that, and we all know as soon as Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, the Afghani government fell almost immediately. Now we flip to Iraq, and while Iraq has two similarities with Venezuela, everything else in Iraq is completely different. So first and foremost, Iraq obviously has Sunnis and Shias, a sectarian conflict that was always brewing underneath the surface under Saddam Hussein, and you have to throw in the Kurds are also there, so you have an ethnic conflict mixed up in there, and Saddam Hussein was essentially the strong man that was keeping that together, and removing him obviously set off that powder keg. In addition to that, you also have the Iranians who were supporting Shia militia in that particular state to make sure that all of our efforts got undermined. The Bush administration actually allowed them to set up a government very similar to Iran. So yeah, Iraq was obviously more destined for disaster, but again, other than the two similarities that they have with Venezuela, the situation over there is completely different. And those two similarities are obviously Iraq is oil rich, Venezuela is oil rich, and of course, Saddam Hussein and Nicolas Maduro look almost identical. Essentially, Nicolas Maduro is Latino Saddam Hussein, or Saddam Hussein is actually Arabic world version of Nicolas Maduro. The resemblance bullets is uncanny. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying, but the fact is everything else is completely different, because while in those countries you have a bunch of crazed Muslims that again have their 1,000-year-old blood feuds with each other. In Afghanistan, these are tribal blood feuds. In Iraq, these are Sunni Shia, and of course the ethnic blood feud with the Kurds. That is not present in the nation of Venezuela. It's a largely Catholic country. These are people who have a national identity that they actually care about. And again, these are people who have already rejected their leader, Nicolas Maduro, and did not want him in office, so much so that after the election, which Maduro already tried to rig by throwing out the candidate that he thought was most likely to beat him, he still ended up losing the election and he was remaining in power.
So just in concluding, for decades, other administrations have neglected or even contributed to these growing security threats in the Western Hemisphere. Under the Trump administration, we are reasserting American power in a very powerful way in our home region. And our home region is very different than it was just a short while ago. The future will be, and we did this in my first term. We had great dominance in my first term, and we have far greater dominance right now.
So yeah, this is Iraq 2.0 or 3.0 or 4.0 or 5.0 or World War III, the 8th time that we went into World War III, all of those narratives are completely absurd and ass backwards. In reality, this is likely to be an intervention that actually ends up working out. That being said, again, Venezuela was not actually a threat to the United States of America. That should not go without being stated. Obviously, that is absolutely crucial information that should be out there. And of course, Venezuela was not a big trafficker of narcotics to the United States of America. Fentanyl was not coming through Venezuela. Cocaine, less than 10% of American cocaine ended up coming through Venezuela. And by the way, that was due to their close proximity to Colombia. So if we were going to overthrow over cocaine, it would be Colombia, not Venezuela. This was obviously an intervention done under the premise of the Monroe Doctrine. And while I would have supported that, had that actually been what was sold to the American people, unfortunately, the Trump administration lied to us repeatedly about narco-terrorism, and that is not a good thing, and we should not accept that as a good precedent, even if this operation was extraordinarily successful, and this intervention is likely to be successful, which is a rarity. It's an exception, not the rule when it comes to overthrowing a regime in a different country for the United States of America.
You said that the U.S. is going to run Venezuela, so who's in power right now?
Well, we're going to be running it with a group, and we're going to make sure it's run properly. We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure, which will cost billions of dollars. It'll be paid for by the oil companies directly. They will be reimbursed for what they're doing, but it's going to be paid. And we're going to get the oil flowing the way it should be. As you know, it was just a minor flow. It was actually a minor flow for what they have. But we're going to run it properly, and we're going to make sure the people of Venezuela are taken care of. We're going to make sure the people that were forced out of Venezuela by this thug are also taken care of.
In addition to that, because Trump likes to shoot off the mouth and we don't actually know if he means what he says, he started talking about how we are going to run Venezuela, we're going to rebuild this, we're going to rebuild that, and I'm not really interested in all of that. If you have a plan for a transition, which you definitely should have if you remove somebody from power, then go with that plan, but hand it off to the Venezuelans. You can support the government that is newly created after the fact, but you definitely 100% should not be running Venezuela for any kind of long-term period or anything of the sort. Now, as for the rebuilding of the infrastructure, specifically the oil infrastructure, this is the part that is actually going to aggravate me, and I will explain to you guys out there in the audience exactly why. Because a lot of people will tell you, because this is the quick and easy answer, that this intervention was all about oil. United States of America wanted to get all that oil. Trump said that he wants to develop the oil and all that stuff, but in reality, if you actually looked at what the oil company CEOs were saying, they were actually not interested in this intervention. And Chevron, which is the only U.S. company that is allowed to operate in Venezuela, definitely was not interested in that because, again, they're already operating there and they don't want any kind of disruption to happen in that nation. Now, the reason they're not interested in operating in Venezuela, or at least they weren't interested in operating in Venezuela, is because the price of oil is actually pretty low right now in terms of where it's been in recent years.
But we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain. This is a very dangerous attack. This is an attack that could have gone very, very badly. Could have gone very badly. We could have lost a lot of people last night. We could have lost a lot of dignity. We could have lost a lot of equipment. The equipment is less important, but we could have lost a lot. And we're going to make sure that this is proper.
And the reason this matters is because decades of socialism in Venezuela has degraded their oil system to such an extent that obviously you're going to need huge investments into that infrastructure in order to build up that oil infrastructure in order to actually produce at the level that they can produce. But the thing is, if the price of oil doesn't match that level of investment or doesn't make it profitable to do that level of investment, it's not going to get done whether you have Maduro in office or not. So what this ultimately ends up meaning is that the Trump administration might offer subsidies to these oil companies, some kind of payout through the government, to develop this infrastructure to offset the cost because it's not profitable to do right now at this moment in time. And this is the stuff that I'm not interested in at all whatsoever, because in reality, we should not be paying oil companies to develop this, because eventually the price of oil will go up and they will pay for it for themselves when that period of time actually happens. And this is where the intervention honestly gets a little bit gross in my opinion, because we should not be paying to develop the resources on behalf of a company at this moment in time. We should just allow the price to fluctuate and then have that done, when it actually is economically viable, rather than try to manage it at a governmental level. Now look, obviously Trump kind of just says things, so we don't know exactly if that's what he meant. I'm trying to read what he's saying, but the man has been known to say things that are kind of not the actual policy. But if we start hearing from Marco Rubio that we're going to have to put in investments in order to develop their oil, then yeah, that's going to be a problem. That's not something I'm really all that interested in. And even if that is good for Venezuela's economy, that does not necessarily mean it's good for our economy. Now, of course, it is good for us to have the largest proven oil reserve nation in the entire world on our side, working with us with a friendly government rather than a hostile government. It is good for us to set a tone that we will not allow Chinese subversion in our hemisphere. That gives us dominance over the region and allows us to maintain our status as a superpower. But unlike Iraq or Afghanistan, that are of course going to choose the most radical strain in their particular government, let us let the Venezuelan people actually democratically elect new people that are going to align with us, because guess what? They had their experiment with socialism. It was an absolute disaster. It worked exactly how it works each and every time, and they would be more likely to voluntarily come towards us after we got rid of Maduro and his regime, which was the biggest obstacle to the Venezuelan people expressing their actual opinion. Also, I want to point out, since Venezuela has been kind of cleaned up now that you got rid of Maduro, obviously we're going to know more in this transition time to the new government. That means that Venezuelans that came here seeking asylum from the Maduro regime can start making their way back home to Venezuela, which I think is a good thing.
Nicolas Maduro was indicted in 2020 in the United States. He is not the legitimate president of Venezuela. That's not just us saying it. The first Trump administration, the Biden administration, the second Trump administration, none of those three recognized him. He's not recognized by the European Union and multiple countries around the world. He is a fugitive of American justice with a $50 million reward, which I guess we saved $50 million. And
we should make sure.
Yeah, exactly. But
don't let everybody claim it. Nobody deserves it but us.
But I want to be clear about one thing. Nicolas Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this. He was provided multiple very, very, very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man, chose instead to play around. And the result is what we saw tonight. The other message here is the following. You have a guy, like many people around the world, they like to play games. You have a guy who decides he's going to invite Iran into his country, is going to, do the confiscation of American oil companies, is going to flood our country with gang members, is going to take Americans prisoner and try to hold them for hostage and trade them like he was able to do with the Biden administration. Basically likes to play games all this time and thinks nothing's going to happen. And I hope what people now understand is that we have a president. The 47th president of the United States is not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it. He actions it. I can tell you, I've watched this process now for 14, 15 years, been around it. Everybody talks. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. When I get there, we're going to do this. We're going to take. This is a president of action. I don't understand yet how they haven't figured this out. And now, if you don't know, now you know.
Also, we can actually start sending criminals directly back to Venezuela now, because if you guys will recall, Nicolas Maduro was refusing to take Venezuelan deportees, and that's the whole reason why we were sending them to that prison in El Salvador, because he thought he was going to disrespect the United States of America by saying that we have to take care of his criminals, and obviously, we're not interested in that, and Maduro is gone. And by the way, there is a video posted by the White House where you have Maduro daring the United States to come and get him, saying that he's here at this location. Yeah, the United States definitely did do that. They 100% got you. You are now in custody. How about that?
Because this is the way it's going to play out. And I think people need to understand that this is not a president that just talks and does letters and press conferences. And, you know, if he says he's serious about something, he means it. And this is something that was a direct threat to the national interest of the United States. And the president addressed it. There's a president of peace, by the way. I told you what I just said earlier. This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now, very happy, but instead he wanted to play big boy. And so now, you know, he's got other sets of problems on his hands. And but I think the message here should be for the world. Look, the president doesn't go out looking for people to pick fights with. He's not generally wants to get along with everybody. We'll talk and meet with anybody, but don't play games. Don't play games with this president's in office, because it's not going to turn out well.
Now, by the way, I also want to congratulate the Venezuelan people, Venezuelans in the United States of America, who are all celebrating, who are all super happy that Maduro is gone. And I want to say sorry for all the socialists in the United States of America that are oh so sad about Maduro going. You have Mondani crying about one of his idols, Nicolas Maduro, being tossed from office. You have Bernie Sanders talking about his dear, dear friend, Nicolas Maduro, being tossed from office. And yeah, sad day for you guys. Maybe socialism will work the next time. Also, Mamdani, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying every time you hear a helicopter, think it might be the Trump administration coming for you. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a very successful operation for the Trump administration. Till next time.